So, why do I love Necron so much? Let's find out in this 3rd edition 40k Necron Codex review. It's coming right up. Oh, excuse me. Oh.
Necrons!
Necrons! Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. And if you're new to the channel and you want to keep up to date with the Wonders of Warhammer 40k, then please subscribe and hit the bell button so you don't miss an upload. And remember, I upload on a Monday, Thursday and Saturday every week. Okay, so today is going to be a lot of fun. We are going to take a look at this awesome Necron Codex. This codex is from when I started the hobby way back in 3rd edition. And today I thought it would be pretty cool to have a look at this old codex. There's a lot in this pretty thin book, but what is in there is pretty awesome. Now, before we do a review of this codex, I thought it would be fun if I shared my story of how I got into 40k in the first place and how I found this awesome codex. Now, this codex came out in around 2002, the same time I got into the hobby. It was a work colleague of mine that introduced me to the hobby. We played a game of orcs versus tyranids. I was in control of the orcs, and I'll always remember the zoanthropes doing some sort of psychic power and destroying an orc buggy in one shot. It was pretty awesome to see, and I have to be honest, it was at that moment that I thought 40k is for me. However, I didn't know which armies I wanted to play, so I went down to my local store and had a look at all the codices. What is that?
Hey, dude, there he is. Oh, hey, Nick! We love you, man!
Woo!
We love you!
We love you, Nick!
Alright, we'll be right here.
Necrons!
We'll be right here. We're right here.
We're here, Nick!
Did he see us? You think he saw us?
I think he saw us.
Dude, we're famous.
Quit, pretend you didn't see it, Nick. And that is when it hits me. This picture on this codex, I had no idea what was on the inside, but I loved that picture, and from that moment on, I loved Necrons.
Necrons!
So let's go table down and have a look inside. Okay, so let's have a look at this codex. So once you get past the awesome front cover, on the first page you've got another awesome picture. The picture of the Necrons coming down to a planet via deep strike with the Monoliths as the pivotal unit. So you've got the Monoliths here, you've got a few destroyers and some warriors, just an awesome picture. You can imagine how the Necrons invaded a planet, really, really cool. Of course, you then got the index of what's in the codex. Now, this codex was written by Andy Chambers, Pete Haynes, Graham McNeil, Phil Kelly and Andy Hoare. Quite a few authors for one codex. Of course, we've got the introduction to Necron, so this is about the army. I'm not going to read the whole thing of the codex in terms of the fluff. I do actually have a video, believe this or not, covering the Necron fluff. Basically, I've read from the old codex fluff in a video, so I'll link you up to that in the description below. But I do want to read the first paragraph under this section for Necrons, and it says, "The Necrons, an alien race ancient beyond imagining, are awakening from their 60 million year dormancy to plague the living once more. Thousands of immortal, soulless warriors have risen from the dusty stasis tombs, intent on preying on the teeming species of the galaxy." Now, this paragraph really stole my heart to the point that I actually named my Necron Army the Soulless Necrons, based on that paragraph. It is actually a great read, the Necron fluff, but I have to say I haven't read the new Necron fluff, which has basically made this fluff defunct, but I do like this fluff, and my army is based on this original fluff, and to be fair, I'm not changing that for anyone. Now, as we go over, we've got the mystery of the Necrons, again more fluff, And interestingly, you've got a picture here which is a warrior, but it's the old school warrior, so it's actually this warrior just here. Now of course this codex is going to be using these models as warriors, so this is obviously some older artwork just here. And you have a transmission and more sort of fluff as such. Pretty cool picture there as well. And then we come into the Shadow Games, which I believe is about the assassins. Coming through here, we've got the Darkness Rising. Again, just more fluff. Awesome picture of a flayed one. Love that picture. These old black and white pictures that we used to have in the old codex, in my personal opinion, much better than the sort of computer generated ones that we get nowadays. Okay, so now we go into the actual army, so the Necron Army list. Now first of all, it shows you the force organisation chart. Now this is what we had in the old days, just one option. Basically in modern days we now call them detachments, but it was FOCs back then. And you had to have compulsory 1 HQ and 2 troops. Now you could have an additional HQ, so 2 HQs was the maximum. You could have 4 additional troops, so 6 in total, and then 3 elites, 3 fast attack and 3 heavy support. And that was your only option, unless you went for dual force organisation charts. So basically take the minimum amount of units you needed for one FOC and then take a second one. But if I remember rightly, you had to have permission from your opponent to do that. So very interesting, very basic, and this is what I grew up with. In actual fact, whenever I start my armies, 1 HQ and 2 troops is usually where I start my list from, purely because that's what I'm used to. You have the army list entries where you get the unit name and profile and types, and then a few special Necron notes, things like sentries, which were a rule back in those days, capturing Necrons, experience, as if you were doing campaigns. And then over here we've got the Necron special rules. The most interesting one, We'll Be Back, which of course has now been renamed as Reanimation Protocol. Quite different to what it used to be. I believe you had to have a resurrection orb, and then you had to be within 6 inches of that resurrection orb. And then you had to have another unit of the same type on the table. So effectively you were huddled around a resurrection orbs to get your Will Be Backs. However, this codex lasted me for 10 years. I was playing this before they updated it, so I played this codex quite a lot. Now this RP, Will Be Back, was on a 4+, and when the models got up, they joined the closest unit of the same type, which was quite interesting in its rules. And then you had things like the Tomb Spiders, so they gave you additional bonuses to RP. And of course we had the biggest rule that we had for Necrons, which I think a lot of people didn't like, and that was the phase out. So once you lost 75% of your army disappeared. It phased off of the table and you lost effectively. So it made surviving as Necrons the key thing, but then you did have a 4+ RP, so it was easier to survive in those days, but choosing whether to go first or second was very important with Necrons. Now ideally you wanted to go first with the phase out special rule, because phase out is done at the beginning of the Necron turn. So if you were on turn 5 for example, you could take your turn, assuming you had over 25% of your army left, and then your opponent could have his turn. He could destroy your army below the threshold, but if the game ended, you didn't necessarily have to take your next turn. Thus, it didn't matter that you were under the percentage. And as I said, if you did go under the percentage, you phased out and you lost, regardless of how many victory points you had on the table. It was quite an interesting rule to have, and of course one which they subsequently dropped from the future codexes. Hopefully it never comes back. Right, so the next page we've got the armory. So this is where we have all the stats for the weapons and also a description of how they work, and we have some points for some of the upgrades. Quite interesting, a lot of the names are quite similar to what we still have. So Chronometron's in there, got Lightning Field, Gaze of Flame, Phylactery, not that I can ever say it, Solar Pulse, Veil of Darkness, the Resurrection Orb, of course. So very similar stuff in there, but of course the rules were slightly different, and indeed some of the special abilities were on different units. Obviously we didn't have a cryptic, so Chronometron back in the day, for example, which was 10 points, a Necron Lord with Chronometron, and any unit he has joined rolls an extra dice and discards the lowest when determining how far they can make a sweeping advance and fall back. Of course we don't have sweeping advance anymore. Right, we come to the main section, so this is the actual units themselves. So first of all we've got the HQs. So HQs, just one HQ, and that is the Necron Lord. And I think this is where my preference to playing foot models rather than, let's say, a Catacomb Command Barge comes from. It's because I'm used to playing Lords, basically. The Overlord really has replaced the Lords now. The Lord has a smaller role in the new Codex, but this was it basically. You had a Necron Lord. Now the Lord was 100 points, but you always took loads of war gear with him. I think my usual Lord would cost me around 210 points off memory after I'd buffed him with everything, including the Veil of Darkness, although I believe you still could only have one of those per army. So stat wise, weapon skill 4, ballistic skill 4, strength 5, toughness 5, 3 wounds, initiative 4, which was awesome because most Necrons were initiative 2, and initiative works totally different then. It used to go in, the highest initiative used to assault first, so Necrons hardly ever assaulted first. Leadership 10 and then a 3+ save, came with the Staff of Light, and you could upgrade him with the War Sign. A Lord can have up to 100 points worth of equipment from the Necron War Gear list, and I think he can take his War Sight as well, so I believe it was 210 points you could have in total. And used to give him Phase Shifter, which gave him the Invulnerable save, used to give him the Resurrection Orb, Veil of Darkness, etc. So I believe, yes, and also you do have the option to give him a Destroyer Body, which was 30 points. So of course you did have the Destroyer Lord or the Lord version, so effectively you had two HQs. It was just how they did it back in the day. So that was your HQs. Now next up is the elites, and the first one that we have is the Pariah, which of course is the unit which is no longer available for Necrons. Arguably they've been replaced by Lich Guard, but yeah, the Pariah. So if you've not seen a Pariah before, this is the model. I had 10 of them. They were quite expensive, 36 points. Now bearing in mind, when we were playing this particular codex, the maximum games we used to play was 1500 points. Now the Pariah had a War Sigh with all of the models, which had a built-in Gauls blaster, so an immortal gun, which was great. The only thing about it, although it had a 3+ save, it didn't have any will be back, any RP function. It was, however, soulless, so enemy units within 12 inches had their leadership reduced to 7, which worked quite well in conjunction with a piece of war gear that you had on the Necron Lord, giving you extra leadership. I think it was actually take a leadership test. Yes, that's it. So the Lord had a function where you could make your enemy take a leadership test, and then you would use the Pariahs to reduce the leadership down to 7. Then we had a little anti-psychic abomination thing here. So any psychic within 6 inches of Pariah at the start of the turn must take morale checks. So again, you combined that. And they were fearless, which was great. So they didn't actually have to take any morale checks. They just automatically passed them, which was good. Now the key thing here is the War Size is totally different to what it is now, in that the War Size ignored invulnerable saves. No saves whatsoever from a War Size. So War Size were great, but like I said, they were 36 points each. They didn't come back after they died, and they were hard to get into close combat, which is obviously where they excelled. And if you were just going to keep them for shooting with their gun, then you might as well have just taken Immortals, which is up next, because believe it or not, Immortals used to be in the elite section. So Immortals were 28 points. Going back to the pariahs, you could have a unit of 4 to 10, but obviously the bigger the better, because they will just die. And it's pretty much the same for Immortals. They used to be 5 to 10. They were 28 points each, so a unit of 10, 280 points. However, they did have the Gauze Blaster, which was a pretty nice weapon. Let's just quickly go back to the weapon. So the Gauze Blaster was 24 inches, strength 5, AP 4. AP did work slightly differently then, but they had 2 shots each, and they were an assault weapon. And the entire unit could take a destruction field for 2 points per model. I forgot that. That would make them 30 points each, and a destruction field, for a quick look what that did, so I can't remember. Disruption fields used in assault against vehicles. Oh yes, that's right. Any hits inflicted on the target by a unit equipped with disruption fields will score a glancing hit on a 6. So that's basically the Gauze weapon, but in assault. So Gauze in this edition would cause an auto glancing hit on a 6. Awesome rule, and Necrons were really good at taking out vehicles when this codex came out, and the disruption field of course basically gave you that in the assault. However, you didn't take it because it just made the unit quite expensive, or at least I don't think I ever took it. Okay, so next is the Flayed Ones, still in the elite slot, and 18 points each here. Flayed Ones have gone up and down in points over the years. Interestingly, again, this is a unit of 4 to 10, and they just had claws effectively. Now, the entire unit could take destruction fields for 3 points each, and you did take it on these because of course they were an assault unit, so you were looking at 21 points. They had the infiltration special rule, so you could effectively you could deploy them forward. They could also deep strike, although of course you could only come in turn 2 and you couldn't assault. Then they had move through cover, which I believe you rolled an extra dice and took the highest. And then terrifying visage. So effectively, if somebody wanted to assault the units, they'd have to do a leadership test, and then they will be at weapon skill 6 regardless. So effectively, it would make the Flayed Ones better in assault if your enemy failed the leadership check. So we then move on to troops, and you'll notice one single entry. That is the warrior. So yeah, the Necron warrior. So that was our only choice, and the minimum unit was 10, and they were 18 points each. Now the great thing about warriors back in these days, I mean, warriors were sufficient enough to be troops and our only troops option. They were 18 points, but they had a 3+ save. They had the Gauze Flayer, which was a strength 4 weapon that was rapid fire, and you could again give it disruption fields if you wanted to, but we never did that. Any warrior unit in excess of the minimum required by the force organisation charts for the mission, so in other words, if you had 3 units, the 3rd unit could begin the game in reserve, whether the reserve special rule is in play or not. When they arrive, they must arrive from a Monolith portal. Monoliths were quite important in the Necron Codex back in the day. If there is no Monolith when the units become available, they would be forced to wait until a Monolith becomes available. So I don't think I really did that particular rule. Generally, to be fair, if you start adding this up, 2 squads of troops, so 2 squads of the minimum amount, which was 10 warriors, that was 180 points. So you're looking at 2 squads of 180, and then your Lord, which was around 200 by the time you bought the war gear that you needed, and all of a sudden you had a lot of points just there in your 2 troops and your HQ. You didn't really have too many extra points to play with, especially if you're playing 1500 points, which is what we were playing back in the day. So small games for Necrons were really hard. You had very expensive troops and HQs, and you had the 75% phase out rule. You played 1000 points with Necrons, you couldn't really do much with them. However, they were a solid troops choice. Now, next up is fast attack. So fast attack, we have the Wraiths. So they are in there, and you can only have a unit of 3 back in the day, so it's between 1 and 3. And they had the special rule phase out, which effectively gave them the 3+ invulnerable save, and they sort of ignored cover, similar to what we have. Wraith flight. Wraith moves in the same way as a jet bike, because they can pass intangibly through terrain. That's right, jet bikes used to move 24 inches, I forgot that. So Wraiths were very speedy, as were destroyers, because they were jet bikes as well, which is up next. So destroyers, Wraiths were 41 points. Destroyers were 50 points, quite similar to what they are now, aren't they? But 3 to 5 in one unit, and they had the Gauze Cannon, which was an awesome weapon. And the main reason why it was so awesome, and what we would love to have now, is 36-inch gun. 36 inches, strength 6, AP 4. They didn't go straight through marine armour, but you had 3 shots each at 36 inches at the high strength. Really, really awesome guns. I'd give up that AP for the range any day, because range is what we need for Necrons. Not only that, they were jet bikes, and as I said, jet bikes moved 24 inches, pretty awesome. So that is the destroyers, and next we've got the Scarab Swarms, which were 12 points each. And they had a 5+ save there. The entire swarm may have disruption fields, but 4 points for disruption field. So you're looking at 16 points there. They were fearless, they could deep strike. They had the swarm special rule, which is where I believe if you had double toughness, the whole unit was wiped out. I think that was the rule. Vulnerable to blasts. Oh no, that was that rule. So the Scarab Swarms move and fight in the same way as jet bikes, but don't get the +1 to toughness bonus. But, oh yes, that's right. So jet bikes had a +1 to toughness. So your destroyers, that's where they were toughness 5, but your Scarabs didn't get that. They could move 24 inches, so you used to take a Destroyer Lord, which was a jet bike, and then you used to take your Scarab Swarms as their sort of bodyguard, because the HQs could join any unit they wanted, so that was a nice combo. Small targets being extremely hard to hit in cover, the Swarm's cover save is +1, which was pretty cool. Definitely wanted them in cover. Right, next, the heavy support. Okay, so first we've got the Tomb Spider, which is why I always call the Canoptic Spider a Tomb Spider, because it's just habits from playing this codex. But you could replace one of the claws with a particle projector, basically a gun. Had the hover special rule, monstrous creature, it was fearless, but the main thing, the Artificer. So each Necron turn, a Tomb Spider that is not in close combat can expert energy to create a Scarab Swarm. The swarm is placed in contact with the spider. It used to make up a unit. Now back in those days, when you shot at something, you went by the toughness of the majority of the models. So if you generated too many Scarab Swarms, your units then would be toughness 3. So the idea was to keep it even with the spider, so you could be a toughness 6 unit, and when someone shoots you put the wounds on the Scarab Swarms. Next turn you generate another Scarab Swarm to keep your toughness going, and that's how you try to avoid the spider going down quickly. Right, next up is the Heavy Destroyer. So again, you've got the destroyers in the fast, and then you've got the Heavy Destroyer in the heavy support slot. Between 1 and 3, a heavy Gauze Cannon. To be fair, heavy destroyers haven't really changed that much, apart from the fact that these guys were jet bikes, so again they had the fast moving ability. Necrons used to actually be quite fast. I suppose you've got Tomb Blades now, haven't you? But yeah, 3+ save, and then the Gauze Cannon, which is exactly the same stats pretty much as what you have now. So the Heavy Gauze Cannon, sorry, is 36 inches, strength 9, AP 2, 1 shot, so pretty much no change. And then the Monolith. So the Monolith came in, and in this particular codex, at 235 points, and we actually had armour. So this was a 14 all round, so similar armour to a Land Raider, but I don't think off memory a Land Raider was 14 at the back. I could be wrong there though. And a ballistic skill of 4. It was a tank and it was a skimmer. Skimmers had special rules, they were hard to hit. and they had the Gauss Flux Arc, and of course the big gun. Now they had some special rules, living metal, so totally different to what it used to be. So the Monolith is made of living metal, which is not only self-repairing but is capable of adapting its structure to resist incoming attacks. Attacks which counts the target's armor value as being less, i.e. Eldar, than it really is, such as bright lances, there you go, do not do so against the Monolith. Similarly, weapons that get additional armor penetration dice, such as chain fists, monstrous creatures or mounted weapons, do not get the extra dice against the Monolith. Ordnance weapons still roll 2d6 for armor penetration and take the highest. Then you had the ponderous special rule. The Monolith is a skimmer which can move up to 6 inches a turn, and if it wishes, remain totally stationary. It will not drift if stunned or shaken, and if immobilized will not crash like other skimmers, but will sink slowly to the ground and continue to fight from there. So again, it was quite resilient on the vehicle chart. There used to be a vehicle wounding chart, but the Monolith was quite resilient for that. And then you had the Deep Strike special rule. Again, it had some extra rules for this, so it wouldn't scatter and die, it would just scatter and move the models out of the way because it was just so big. So pretty useful. It also could come in Deep Strike even if the reserve special rule wasn't around. And then you had the Gauss Flux Arcs projectors, which were D6 shots at every unit with a model within 12 inches of the Monolith. Each weapon destroyed result inflicted on the Monolith reduces the number of shots that they attack by with the Gauss Flux Arc. So again, if you got weapon destroyed, you were covered, you just reduced one of the dice for the Flux Arcs rather than actually destroying a whole weapon. So again, made it very survivable. Then we had the Power Matrix, which is basically the crystal at the top. So in the shooting phase, it may discharge the energy as a particle whip. In the movement phase, it may use its portal to allow entire units, especially warriors, immortals, flayed ones, destroyers, heavy destroyers, or wraiths, and any Necron Lord that has joined such a unit to phase out. So basically, you could teleport a unit through the Monolith portal, and in doing so, you could re-roll your will be backs, your RP. Really, really cool. There was a range to that, I think it was 18 inches. So yeah, the Monolith was an awesome tank back in the day. Such a shame that it isn't now, however I'm sure it will be one day. Then just have a little summary of all of the stats for the different units and another piece of awesome artwork. And then we go into some more fluff, the beginning of time. So this is about the Necron Tire, the War in Heaven, and the old ones, plus talking about the C'tans. And the reason why we're doing that is we're then going to the C'tan special rules and abilities. So these were special characters back in the day. You actually had to have permission to play them with your opponent, and I believe you could only play them at 1500 point or more armies, although like I said, the maximum back in those days was generally 1500 points, or at least that's what we used to play. Now the C'tans had some awesome abilities. They were really tough, really hard to take down, and the Nightbringer particularly was the main one which you would try to play. Now having said that, the Nightbringer was 360 points, so pretty expensive, but a weapon skill of 6, ballistic skill of 4, strength 10, toughness 8 with 5 wounds, and a 4+ save. It was a character, so a C'tan is an independent character and follows all of the rules for the characters given in the Warhammer book, modified by the above all others rule. They may not join friendly units, so you weren't able to join anything. And then you had the Lightning Arc, which was a 24-inch gun, strength 9, AP 2, 1 shot, and then the Gaze of Death, and also Ethereal Tempest. I'm not going to go over the rules in too detail there, but basically, trust me, they were nasty. They were very nasty. You then had the Deceiver, where you had the ability to redeploy, a bit like we do now. 300 points for the Deceiver. He was very usable. I think towards the end of the Codex life, where we had the Codex creep, When this codex came out, it was awesome. After 10 years, it was very difficult to win with this codex. I think generally I would be aiming to draw with this codex. If I went for a draw, I could do it. If I went for a win, I usually lost. But the Deceiver was more potent towards the end of this, down to the redeployment of units. It just helped to deceive your opponent, literally what is called the Deceiver, so why not? But yeah, the Deceiver. And then we go on to the section of the codex which is also missing now. So about collecting the army. So again, it's pretty pictures really in this first section, just going through the organisation charts, what it looks like on the table. But the thing which I loved about this codex was the following pages. So the horrors of the Necrons. So this is basically just running over the units, but most importantly for me, it was where I got the inspiration for painting my models. If you look at my army, they're painted like this, apart from the only difference would be the Monolith. And that's because I didn't want a green Monolith. I don't know why, it just didn't sit well for me. I had everything silver, so I thought I wanted a silver Monolith. I went for green terrain instead. But yeah, my models are all painted exactly like, or at least as close as I could get them, to the units in here. Then you've got the hobby section. How about that? So it tells you how to build your models, how to glue them. It warns you about gluing the stems on. It warns you about gluing the rods on. It tells you to glue them in with PVA glue, and a few tips on basing the models and how to paint them. Very interesting, especially when you're a noob. Bearing in mind this was my first codex, I didn't know anything about the hobby, and I'm sure a lot of people who buy codexes these days are also in the same position. A little section on expanding your force and Necron tactics. My advice, ignore those. As a beginner, I of course tried them, but they're rubbish. They may be quite thematic, let's say, you know, in deploying the Monolith right at the back like they've done it there, but tactically it doesn't work. And I found that with a lot of Games Workshop articles, is that they weren't actually tactically that great. So you probably ignore that if you ever do get it. And then we've got painting in detail. So this is just more showcase of painting effectively. The Nightbringer, how awesome is that? I did try to duplicate that on my Nightbringer, but I duplicated it using dry brushing. It came out pretty well, but nothing like this. So yeah, the Nightbringer. And then Necron colour schemes. So we didn't have dynasties back in those days, however, there was a suggestion of different colour schemes, and I have to be honest, it took me a long time to come up with my colour scheme, although obviously, as I said, I did duplicate these here, but the first unit that I painted was a Necron warrior, and I saw this and thought, my god, how am I going to paint it? So in the end I came up with this one. This was the one I went for, so you can see there's my warrior. So I went for this design, that's what I liked. Once I'd worked out that that was the design that I was going to go for, it was only natural then to go for the rest of the codex to look like that. So that's where it came from. Maybe if I'd chosen the red one, for example, which of course we now know as Novok, I probably wouldn't have painted the rest of the army the same as the codex. But it was this one here that I liked. I liked Terminator, and it reminds me of Terminator scheme. Okay, so what else have we got? We've got awesome picture of Monolith. Maybe, truth be told, one reason why I didn't go for a green Monolith was because I didn't know how to paint it. I mean, looking at that, it looks absolutely awesome, and like I said, I didn't really know anything about painting, and that looks impossible to paint. So I thought, go for silver, dry brush it, job done. That's probably the truth. A little bit on the Necron symbols, the glyph, and then this image here, which, wow, do you recognise this? So yeah, this is the tomb which I copied my tomb of. I'll put a picture of that up right now for you to have a look at. So that's my tomb, totally based on this. In these days you could buy Games Workshop spares, you could buy the sprues and stuff, so I bought 2 Monolith sprues specifically to get those 2 pieces there to build my terrain. The ball was just a marble that I used. So yeah, it cost me £20 to get those 2 sprues. Of course, I made good use of the extras that were in the Monolith for spare parts and pieces of terrain, etc. But yeah, that cost me £20, and I think the foam board, by the time I bought all the sheets that I needed, that was £30. So this tomb cost me £50 to make. I think it was 50, it may have been 40, but it's around that figure. It was 40 to £50 to make it, but what an awesome piece of terrain, I love it. As you can see, exactly the same as my table, so just grey with the green crystals. So I went for this. As I said, the only exception was the Monolith, which I think, to be fair, when you see that army picture there, the Monolith needs to be silver. I mean, I think half of it was difficult to paint, but also the other half was the fact that the terrain's green. Why is that green? It's not terrain, it's a vehicle. It should be silver like the rest of the army. And then there's the crystals just there. You may have seen, I don't get them out very often because they're not very well made, but I did make those crystals. That was the first piece of terrain that I made. My main issue is I've got the foam at the bottom way too thick, so they look a bit weird. However, I did make them. And then some showcase pictures of some awesomely painted Necrons. And yeah, then you're at the back of the Codex, which has, to top it off, just a fantastic black and white picture of a Monolith. And there's more. There is more. Okay, I thought that was the end of the Codex. Right, we then go into, I think basically this is more fluff and awesome black and white pictures. So yeah, fluff, theory, design of the weapons, and a story. Battlefleet Gothic, look at that ship, very cool. This is just basically a story. And how can I forget this? Okay, this is why I love the Codex, just so much in it. So yeah, campaign play, but more importantly for me anyway was this box here, the Necron Tomb World terrain chart. This is generating terrain randomly for your table, but it's got 12 different pieces of terrain which has a description of what they are, and all of my terrain at the beginning when I started making terrain is based on this. So you have the, well, the sandstorm isn't actually a piece of terrain, it's a random dice roll. I think on a 6 you get a sandstorm, which just makes it difficult to shoot. But then you have the abyss, which you may have seen. I've got the sort of crystal going across a bridge, and if you fall in it you die. That rule straight from this book. Obelisks or columns, I've got the mesa, which is that big hill that I've got. Rocky grounds, I've got a really bad piece of rocky grounds which I don't get out because it's so old and it looks rubbish. And ruined terrain structure, which is that small terrain piece that I've got with a tomb entrance, which is basically exactly the same but not ruined. And then the large tomb structure, which is the one which I took from the Codex. The dried rivered bed, which I sometimes get out. The power conduits, took me ages to make those, and in the end I made those pieces from the Incredibles piece of terrain, which, sorry, the Incredibles film, which I made into pieces of terrain which count as a power conduit. This is the only one I haven't made, the Adaptus Mechanicus research post, which is non-Necron terrain, which I'm not sure how well it would fit in, to be fair. But yeah, awesome stuff. Plus, you do have campaign rules here, where I don't really do campaigns, but they were here as well in the Codex. Awesome. Not only that, a Necron mission. Each Codex, or at least the ones that I saw back in the day, my buddy had the Blood Angels, and at the back of the Codex you had a special mission for your army. It has to be said that the mission seems to be totally set up to have a big advantage to the home team. So this Necron mission I think I only played it 3 times, to be fair, but it's very one-sided and the Necrons pretty much always won. And then I used to play the Blood Angels mission, and that was the opposite, so the Blood Angels used to always win their mission in the back. But it's a lot of fun and it's something different to have, and it's in your Codex. Codexes back in the day were just awesome. Then finally, just to finish it off, just a picture there, and then the back. Another awesome picture of Necrons.
Necrons!
Okay, so there you go. I really hope you enjoyed that. And if you're new to the channel, I upload a Necron video every Monday. So if you're not subscribed yet, start now. Hit the Idic Beer icon. And if you want to keep up to date with all of my other Necron videos, I'll put some playlists just there for you to check out. Beam me up!